Hard-boiled blues. The downtown night air was crisp and cool with the slight aroma of misery. He never thought that his life would turn out the way it did. The wife, the kid, the pride, all lost along the way. They were lost somewhere in the belly of the big, bad city, where they would never again age, remaining forever young, beautiful, and full of grace. He still saw them in everything and everyone. A homicide investigator's life is never something called happily ever after. Every day, Detective Chris Priest woke up, looked up, and asked why the fuck he was still around to do it all over again. It was his punishment, you see. His penance was waking up without them, still trying to make a dent of difference in this city on fire. Staring out his window, he poured a quarter glass of Jim Beam and asked himself in the famous words of The Clash, should I stay, or should I rock the Casbah? The familiar metallic taste of the Colt 45 made things real at that moment. It was fear that kept him from biting the bullet. Yet, it was also his lack of fear that kept him afloat another day. It kept him doing what he did best, the only thing he cared about anymore. Fear was for the enemy. Fear and bullets. What little faith he had left hung on like a loose string. One would think Chris would have completely and utterly lost his essence, his humanity, all in a brilliant flash of fuck you dished out by fate. Much had occurred in his life since he swore in and began serving as a rookie sheriff's deputy in Little Texas 17 years ago. However, in the midst of all the glory, the coolness and the climbing, Chris had his number one with a bullet, Abby. She was firecrackers on the 4th. They drank out of the same bottle, never pulling any punches. They spent their days laughing, loving, living, fucking. It was February. The view from Chris's downtown window was covered in white, a rarity. The last time it really snowed in San Antonio was back in 1985, when he was 10 years old. He recalled that day with a warm, fuzzy feeling. He and his best friend were pulled out of school together so that they may go home and enjoy playing in the snow, where they would build snowmen and partake in the cliched snowball fight with their parents. It would be one of the best days of his existence. He liked to go there often when life chewed him up and spit him out. He wished they were there by his side now. They would all enjoy the day off and play just as he did so long ago. "Walk it the fuck off," Chris murmured to himself as he closed his eyes and took in a deep breath, opening his eyes as he exhaled. It wasn't exactly prime conditions for crime fighting in the city today. However, if he spent another moment alone in that bottle of Jim Beam, he might actually choose to rock the Casbah this day. He abandoned his quarter glass of JB and thought, "It'll still be here when I get back. Let's get into fucking character." Chris locked his apartment door. Not that he had much to steal, but it was better than coming home to an already near-empty apartment. Worst case scenario, some scumbag would find all his booze and clean him out. That would be the icing on the chocolate cake. Booze kept him alive these days. It saved his soul. In this city, you can never lose that spark. As he locked his door, he eyeballed the hallway on the right to see if anyone was coming or going. The air was stagnant and ever ominous. Mrs. Bonner, an old broad wasting away from loneliness, was slowly walking towards the stairs, taking her morning walk as she did most mornings. Chris imagined her as the kind of woman expecting some special letter from a special someone that never arrived. He knew everybody had a story, and skeletons. He imagined her once, a young, beautiful dame, in love with a man, and mother to 2 or 3 children. He knew he'd walk past her and she'd greet him, friendly as always, and begin the chit-chat. Most of the lost souls here preferred ignoring her. She reminded them of their own mortality. All the other ghosts of the Camino Real apartment building were stewing in their own misery and preferred to do so alone. Someday, they will have that void to fill too, the hesitation of the young with so much wasted life, they'd walk right past them like they're invisible, looking straight ahead, trying to avoid the simplicity of conversation, busy living, or not living. Too busy for an old ghost. Times sure have changed. "Good morning, Chris. Going out in this mess?" she asked casually. "Good morning, Miss Bonner. Bad guys don't take the day off. Neither can I," he said with a smile. He figured the least he could do was take a minute or three to indulge her. He understood what it was to be all alone in this world, and recognized that big emptiness within her. They were kindred spirits in sorrow. At some point, everybody hurts. Mrs. Bonner visibly brightened up. "You're a comedian. Well, it hadn't snowed here in about 30 years. Do you remember that?" she asked Chris. "Yes, I do. That was a really good day for me. Played in the snow all day with my best friend. And you? What were you doing that day?" he asked her with a reminiscing smile. She looked away from him for a moment down the hallway. "My husband left me for some hussy that day. That was not a good day for me, Chris," she recalled, looking down at the floor, eyes slightly blue. "But the asshole married her and she left him 2 years later. Took him for everything he had," she admitted with a big smile. Chris laughed and held up his hand for a high five. Mrs. Bonner laughed as she high-fived him back. "You have a good day, Mrs. Bonner," he called out as he walked away. "Please, Chris, Mrs. Bonner was my mother. Call me Delia," she answered. That's the name of my favorite Johnny Cash song," he smiled, looking back. With that, he made his way downstairs. Delia was beaming. Chris felt that warm, fuzzy feeling again he hadn't felt in so long. It was good to feel something again, even if just for a brief moment. Chris opened the door to the ancient apartment building. The cold punched him in the eyes as he let out a loud, "Fuck!" His cell phone chimed, a text message from Michael Rodriguez, his partner, or his goddamn babysitter, as he referred to Michael after the captain partnered them up. Michael was all right, though. He just reminded Chris a little too much of his former self. Michael, 11651 Alamo Lane, King William District. Already here. Not pretty. Chris, cold enough for you? On my way, sunshine. He placed his phone back into his pocket. He looked around at the mean streets of this cruel city. She was all covered in white. His gaze found his own car parked along the curb, a 1987 Camaro, black paint chipping away. His black sunshine. Chris bought the car from his aunt when her son died of a heroin overdose. While his family was still alive, Chris put time and money into her. He hoped his son, Connor, would one day be proud to drive her around town, driving around the dames, living the good life of a teenage boy coming into his prime. Connor would help his dad with minor repairs and modifications on the Camaro from time to time. She was their special project. It was the only time they had anymore, usually on the weekends. However, a detective is always on call. He kept Miss Sunshine because she reminded him of the happy times with his son. Connor was only 13 when he departed from this world. The Camaro was Chris's only baby now. He walked over and brushed off some of Mother Nature's blow, only to find most of the car covered in ice. He would need to let her warm up for a while. Lemon Man. The King William District was a historical neighborhood. It had all the charm of LA's Mulholland Drive at sunset. Chris walked up to the beautiful Victorian home, nestled deep within the cozy, well-to-do suburb. The scene was taped off. CSI was in and out of the home. He made his way to a large, covered wooden porch. The outside stucco walls were covered in thick green vine. Dormant, snow-covered bougainvillea vines surrounded the outside property line. The lot in general was immaculate. Someone put a lot of love and money into its overall look and upkeep. Chris carefully walked up the steps and under the yellow tape to meet with Michael at the door. "Hey, good morning, old man," Michael commented upon seeing Chris make his way carefully up the steps. "Good morning, young Padawan," Chris responded to Michael, who was 10 years his junior. Chris was a mess, but Michael thought the sun shined out of his ass, though he'd never admit it. He'd rather bust Chris's balls. He learned a few things from his mentor over the past 2 years, things that have saved his skin more than once. Michael smirked at Chris and began with the rundown. "The medical examiner is inside. We got a one Max Von Drack, Caucasian male, age 68. His throat was slashed, his eyes gouged out and placed into his mouth. It appears it was done while he was still alive. Yeah, bit down on them. The Vic was also clenching a lemon in his right hand. He squeezed the shit out of it too." Chris, being the smartass he was, couldn't resist. "You don't think he was making lemonade, do you, detective?" "Really? That's just wrong, man," Michael said with his eyebrows raised. "Anyway, he also has something carved into his left arm, a link to a website. I took a pic and already checked it out. It's a link to a horror fiction website called Scary Pasta." "Scary Pasta? What in the hell is that?" Chris asked with an expression like he just smelled something rotten. Michael raised his eyebrows. "Yeah, scarypasta.com. It's a horror fiction website where writers post all kinds of short horror stories. It has quite the cult following, apparently. The link is to a story called A Tale of Him Holding a Lemon." Chris laughed. "Are you fucking for real?" He shook his head and looked Michael right in the eye. "Well, take me to the stiff." The SAPD detectives made their way inside the lovely home, which would likely sell fast on the market regardless of the crime. The hallway led to a large living room, finished in a nice oak. Dark, polished wooden floors, bookcases and a china cabinet rested against the old walls. On a large, blood-soaked Persian rug lay a man in a blood-covered yellow sweater vest, white dress shirt underneath, and black slacks. His shoes had been removed. He had a gray mustache and wavy hair. He looked to be small in stature, about 5'6". His eye sockets were empty and bloody. Blood covered the areas of his mouth and neck. The long cut on his throat was apparent. His left shirt sleeve had been rolled up, and the link to the story was indeed carved into his forearm. The wounds on his left arm had begun to dry and scab over, making the carvings even more visible. What kind of monster would do this to an old man? This city and its fucking scumbags. Always on duty. Doesn't look like the work of a button man or a burglar. Looks personal. "Anything taken?" Chris asked. "No, it appears that the killer or killers wanted the attention to be focused on the killing," Michael replied. "Do you think there was more than one killer?" Chris asked over his shoulder. "Not sure. We got CSI running tests. He hasn't been dead too long. Rigor mortis has set in." "Next of kin? Someone has to pay for his burial?" Chris asked. "None yet, but by the looks of things it doesn't seem like he had any kids, if you know what I mean." Michael pointed at a framed picture on a bookshelf of Mr. Von Drack kissing another older man. "He was a daisy. Okay, let's get the patrols interviewing neighbors. Michael, take this photo and make your way around the gay bars tonight," Chris ordered. "Aw, shit," Michael protested. Chris looked at Michael and smiled. "Hey, grunts do the legwork. You know this, sonny boy. Besides, the daisy in the photo is our prime suspect at this point." Chris located Mr. Von Drack's cell phone and did a search. "Okay, I'll start looking for next of kin." Murder, Breakfast of Champions. "It's been 3 hours. I'm hungry. Breakfast. I'm buying," Michael offered. "Yes, you are. I bought last time." Chris patted Michael on the arm. "I had a cup of coffee. That was all." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "Hey, the system works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Chris placed his hand on Michael's back, leading him toward the front door. Chris looked around at the CSI and beat cops and said loudly, "Carry on, my wayward sons." The hash house was cheap, dirty, and nearly empty due to the snow. The stereotypical retired guy was there sipping coffee, reading the newspaper, and loitering. It had all the charm of a funeral home. The air was so thick you could cut it with a machete. Although Chris was depressed in general since the loss of Abby and Connor, he still had a good appetite and the metabolism of a 15-year-old. He wolfed down a grand slam with scrambled eggs, bacon, and pancakes, with a glass of orange juice. He was on his second glass when Michael worked on his coffee and ham and a cheese omelet. It was warm inside the joint, and the staff liked having the cops around since the sheer number of daily crazies was something to take note of. So, whoever killed poor Mr. Von Drack, cool name by the way, wanted us to find the story. Scary pasta? Chris asked. Michael nodded his head. Have you read any of his story yet? Chris asked before gulping down some OJ. No, not yet. I figured I'd do that at the station or at home. It looked pretty long. The guy who wrote it, Andrei Borislava, lives in Detroit and is originally from Bulgaria. He's here on a student visa, Michael informed Chris. Well, let's read it and give him a call. I'll leave the tip, said Chris. Hey, how's Carol and the kids? He asked as he reached into his wallet and pulled out a $5 bill. Michael sat up from the booth and put on his beige trench coat. They're good. Mickey started crawling yesterday, and Eva loves kindergarten. Carol is good. He nodded. That's good. Hey, you spend as much time as you can with those little rugrats. They grow up fast, Chris said as he placed the open 5 under his glass. Hey, why don't you go home at lunch and spend it with Carol? I'll go back to the station and read the story. Just text me the link. I'll fill you in on the cliff notes later, Chris insisted. Yeah, okay. Thanks, man. Michael thanked Chris's kind gesture. He felt pity for Chris. Everybody did. Every day they saw every form of violence under the sun. Shootings, stabbings, suicides, strangulations, decapitations, rape. Yet other cops couldn't imagine, didn't want to imagine, losing their families to the darkness of the streets. Chris Priest had been that kind of cop who had the big prize. Then in a brilliant flash, he lost what was most important. The spark, the fire, that which kept him from losing his marbles after seeing all of the ugly that he had seen. His saving grace. Chris sat in front of the dinosaur of a computer monitor, curiosity piqued. He shared a dark, damp office with Michael towards the back of the station. It was out of the way, just perfect for Chris. The door was closed. He didn't want any interruptions. The time was now 1:49 p.m. Looking at the text message from Michael, he typed in the link. It took him to the Scary Pasta website. A black background appeared with the title, A Tale of Him Holding a Lemon, in white letters. He began to read. He was captivated from the start. Every word, every sentence pulled him in. The story was on par with Stephen King's work. An hour had passed into the story when Chris received a text from Michael. Michael. Calling it a day. At the hospital. Eva had an asthma flare-up. Talk later or tomorrow. Chris. Okay, buddy. Do what you need to do. Von Drack ain't going anywhere. Catch you on the flip. Michael. Thanks. With that, Chris resumed the story with all the intrigue of a child. It told of the writer's horrifying experience of a creepy Cheshire cat-like smiling man who appeared throughout his life, holding up and offering him a lemon. He never said a word, just held a once brilliant yellow lemon, now rotting with the years. It was the same lemon every time. Upon each encounter, the author manages to get away. He traces this man throughout his family history and, after a visit, finds the same man appeared to his grandmother. The pattern continued throughout his life growing up in Bulgaria until he moved abroad to study in the US, which is where he is now. Before he knew it, Chris had finished the story, highly entertained and completely oblivious to the time. It was now 5:04 p.m. Only then did he realize how full his bladder was. After reading the entire story and all of the comments turning up no solid leads, he came to the conclusion that the killer or killers bumped off poor Mr. Von Drack to recreate the ending of the story. But why? He would start with the scribbler. "Hey, Mary, how's it going, dear?" "I'm fine, just burning the midnight oil." "Listen, I have a lead I want to contact but need to trace. He's a Bulgarian national living in Detroit on a student visa. His name is Andrei Borislava." "Right, that's Andrei, Andrei. Borislava like it sounds, Borislava. "Yeah, how soon can you have it?" "Yeah? Good. Thanks, sweetheart. You're a doll. I'll be waiting in my office." Michael wiped away the dream dust from his eyes. All he wanted was just a few more hours of sleep, but he knew that if Chris could manage to wake up every day and pull himself up out of his stupor, so could he. At least he still had his spark, his reason for it all. In the Mexican culture, family is everything. He turned his head to his right side where his wife Carol was sleeping in peacefully, gracefully. The way the light hit her face and shined off of her hair was poetry. He was dizzy with his dame. He turned toward her and kissed her on the forehead, placing his left hand on her hair, caressing the wavy black locks. He turned back and reached over, picking up his cell from the nightstand to check the time. 7:24 a.m. He unlocked the screen and began to text Chris. "Michael, good morning. Breakfast? You're buying." Chris, "Sure. Usual spot, 8:30. I'll be the dapper one in the leather jacket." Michael, "You mean the leather miniskirt, right?" Chris, "Nice comeback. I got intel on the Von Drack case. Catch you on the flip side, amigo." Michael opened the glass door of the hash house and walked through. It looked like a retirement home dining room. He was greeted by the hostess, a smiling kitten. Young, cute, full of life. She was hitting on all 8. "Good morning, sir. Just one?" she asked as she reached for a menu and pre-rolled silverware under the podium. "No, ma'am. I'm meeting my buddy. Over there, the gentleman in the cheap leather jacket." Michael pointed in Chris's direction. Chris gave a confirming wave and nod to the hostess. "Yes, sir. Right this way," she invited with a giggle. Michael followed her to the booth where Chris had just started on his Nutella crepes and scrambled eggs with a side of ham. "Well, well, the Sundance Kid rides again," Chris greeted Michael while working diligently on his crepes. "Good morning, old man River," Michael shot back. "Your server will be right over to take your order, sir," the hostess interrupted them before taking her leave. "Thank you, dear," said Chris. Chris looked up at Michael and asked, "How's Eva?" Michael looked at Chris. "She's doing better today. Gave us quite the scare." "Yeah, glad to hear it. Listen, don't feel bad, but I took over for you last night. I tracked down and spoke to Borislava. Read the story too. It was good," Chris explained. "He had an alibi. He's in Detroit. He seemed horrified that somebody would have linked his pasta and used his..." "Wait, what? His pasta?" Michael interrupted as he gave Chris his full attention. "Yeah, that's how they refer to the stories." "What? Don't give me any grief. They're good. I liked them," Chris said as he looked Michael in the eye before taking another bite of his ham. "Anyway, he wanted to take the story down and I told him to leave it up. It may draw the killer out again and we might be able to track his IP address. I also took Von Drack's photo around the ferry clubs after I spoke to Borislava." Michael began to laugh. "You actually went to a gay bar? So, did you get lucky?" Chris now had an annoyed look on his face. "If you mean did I ID the Nancy boy kissing Von Drack, then yes I did, Watson. Several people confirmed his identity and current whereabouts," Chris retorted. "No shit. Who is he?" Michael was intrigued. He is one Johnny Aguilar, 54, retired U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant and recently deceased. 8 months ago. Heart attack, Chris answered. He was now halfway finished with his breakfast. Just then a tall, wiry man wearing glasses approached the table to take Michael's order. "Good morning, sir. My name is Abel. I'll be taking care of you today. What can I get you to drink?" "Yes, coffee, black, and I'll have the oatmeal with mixed fruit," Michael replied. The waiter repeated Michael's order and disappeared to the kitchen. "So the autopsy results won't be in for 72 hours. Our only lead now is to go back to the station and research the Scary Pasta website. See if the killer has posted anything new on there, bragging or whatever," Chris suggested before gulping down the rest of his tall glass of orange juice. "Yeah, sounds like a plan, man. So how did it go at the gay bars? Anyone try to pick you up?" Old wounds run deep. The lousy old office was cold and reeked of sorrow. It was always so goddamn dark, even with the light on. It had been 4 hours since Chris introduced Michael to the world of Scary Pasta. They read a few stories, trying to become better acquainted with the subject matter and its scribblers. Most of the scribblers seemed to be young, creative people who just wanted the world to catch a glimpse into their souls. Slowly but surely, Michael was becoming a fan. Chris was already familiar with the main characters from the most popular stories. He played narrated Scary Pastas on YouTube for Michael, and they went that route for a while in order to allow their eyes to rest. "Connor would have loved this stuff," Chris said with a slight smile, recalling how Connor loved horror movies and writing short stories. Chris enjoyed reading his stories. He wondered for a moment if his son had indeed discovered the world of Scary Pasta at some point. Michael looked up at Chris for a moment, ready to listen, like a good friend. He didn't quite know what to say. He couldn't imagine the pain Chris felt. He had experienced the worst pain a person can feel. Yet here he was, still fighting crime, catching criminals of the worst kind. Murderers, rapists, child killers. Each scumbag he took off the streets was like a fix, just enough to get him through another few days, like a junkie and their heroin. Criminals were everywhere. Throw a rock into a room and you'd likely hit more than a few. No doubt this city was going to hell in a handbasket. That's why you needed family, if you had them, your own personal Jesus. Chris lost his to the cruel city 2 years ago. They searched for anything new posted in the hours since Mr. Von Drack's death. All they needed was a clue, something, anything to go on. Their search turned up empty. Chris searched for one more story. He typed in Satanists. A title popped up, Summer in Texas, written by Sarah Metal Massacre. He felt something stir inside. He began to read the story. 10 minutes into the story, it hit him like a kick in the nuts. Son of a bitch. "What? Find something?" Michael looked up from his computer screen. "Yeah, this story I'm reading, it's called Summer in Texas. It's written by someone from my old days in Little, when I was with the sheriff's department," Chris explained. Michael was now intrigued. "No shit." Chris began to explain. "Yeah, about 15 years ago. I'd been a deputy for about 2 years. It was right before Abby and me were married." "Yeah, that's right. What was his name? Alan?" Michael interrupted. "Yeah, Bobby Allen," Chris answered. "Is he still around?" Michael asked. "Yes, he still lives in Little. He retired after a heart attack." "It's a wonder he didn't go too when Abby and Connor passed," Michael said, staring at the wall. "You ever go and see him?" Michael began to pry. "No, I haven't been back since the funeral. He calls once in a while to check in on me. He invites me out, but... Look, let's get back to the story. You're raising my Irish here, Mikey." Chris was now clearly annoyed. Michael smiled and nodded, apologizing. "Sorry, man. Go on." "As I was saying, 15 years ago we got a report from 2 local kids, Joey Mayer and Jason Pruitt. They were just kids, 12 or 13. A new family had moved into an old abandoned house up on East Prairie Street. Everyone called it Dead Man's Curve due to the high number of automobile fatalities over the years. It led up to a large hill where the family in question moved. They had this daughter, 12 years old, and from the get-go there was something off about them. They dressed in raggedy old clothes that looked like they were straight from the turn of the century. The boys came to the station one day claiming that they had made friends with the girl, and that morning she had bruises all over her arms. They asked us to check it out. Well, after heading up there, we questioned them, asked if we could see their daughter. They claimed they had no daughter, just an infant son who died shortly after birth. We asked to search the premises. They refused without a warrant. Then we went back to inform the boys. They said that the girl, Sarah, claimed she had an older brother named, Jimmy Lee that lived there with them. That's the name the couple gave for the deceased infant. We went for the warrant immediately. Meanwhile, one of the boys had developed some sort of romantic relationship with Sarah. Joey, I think it was him, the chubby one. They had taken it upon themselves to try and rescue her. Their plan was simple. One hid behind the trash cans while the other threw rocks at the window and shouted from the driveway. As the couple went outside to confront and give chase, the one hiding, which was Joey, would go in and rescue Sarah. It didn't quite pan out that way. We got there just in the nick. They were chasing the boys down the driveway, butcher knives in hand. We told them to stop. When they refused, we shot them dead then and there. I went inside to check on Sarah. She'd been hog-tied and gagged, laying on a black tarp. The parents had dug up a corpse from the cemetery and sat it in a chair. A satanic Bible was on the sofa. The parents had belonged to some backwoods satanic cult in Travis County and had fled after some trouble there. They were planning to sacrifice the girl. Turned out, after an investigation, they had kidnapped her as a baby and murdered her birth parents and raised her. She got treatment, adjusted, was introduced into society, and now, apparently writing. And from what I've read, she's quite good at it too. She's one of the most popular writers on scarypasta.com. All of her stories are narrated on YouTube. Small world, huh? Wow, man. Small world indeed, Michael responded with a surprised look. He thought for a moment, then looked up at Chris. Hey, do you know if she's local now? Maybe she can give some insight on finding the killer. Like a consultant, he suggested. Chris stared at Michael for a moment, then looked off to the right. I don't know, but that's a damn good idea. Glad I thought of it. Well, what are we waiting for? Michael asked with the excitement of a child. I think she goes by another name now. I can't remember what, though. Damn it. My father-in-law would know. She moved back a little while after that. Lived with a foster family who eventually adopted her. We were gone by then. We got married and I got the job with the SAPD. Guess I'll call him up. Here, why don't you get familiar with it while I call Bobby? Chris said hesitantly, not wanting to face the ghosts of the past. Bobby Allen was the one person Chris couldn't face. He was more than ashamed. Chris wasn't worthy of facing his mentor. He gave her away at their wedding. He trusted Chris with his daughter's life, and he failed him. Now he was minus a daughter and a grandson. He knew Bobby was hurting. He looked up to the ceiling and shook his head, saying, "You're killing me softly here." Michael took the hint and stood up from his chair. I'm gonna go to the can, grab some coffee. You want anything? Chris searched through his address book on his cell and briefly looked up at Michael. No thanks, I'm good. With that, Michael took his leave and closed the office door behind him. It was the courteous thing to do, and Michael was raised right. He thought for a moment about how difficult this call would be for his partner and friend. Chris was damaged, but still a good friend and a good cop. He knew that Chris has his demons to chase. It was likely a chase that would never end, not until somebody popped him and stopped him in his tracks, or unless he offed himself. He would likely feel the same way if he were in his shoes, but who knows, right? It was Mike Tyson that said, "Everyone has a plan until they get hit." Chris then called Bobby on the phone. Hello? Hello, Bobby. Chris?
Is that you, son?
Yeah, it's me. Been a while, I know.
Yes, sir. Sure has. How are you, kid?
I'm getting by. Still fighting the good fight, you know. And you?
Well, I'm doing okay. Just trying to keep busy around here. Mona always has something for me to do.
That's good. Now, Chris, is this the social call? You coming out a little? Mona would be real glad to see you, son.
So would I.
I'd like that, Bobby, but, listen, you remember Sarah Campbell?
Sarah? Yeah, I do. She goes by the name Chloe Marks now. The Markses adopted her. Lives in downtown San Antonio, last I heard. Why? What's going on?
It's a long story. I'm trying to locate her. I'm thinking I can use her as a consultant in a case I'm working on. So far, no real leads in the case.
Huh, well, she visits her folks from time to time. Haven't seen her in a while, though. Last I heard, she was writing. I must say, you got my curiosity piqued now.
No kidding. Well,
it's a homicide done in a ritualistic manner. The Vic had a web address carved into his forearm. It's to a horror fiction website where the writers post their stories. The killer recreated a popular story from the site when he murdered the Vic. Funny thing is, in researching various stories on the website for any leads, I came across a story written by Sarah Metal Massacre, a story that tells of her case, written in the third person. She even has us in it. Name slightly altered, of course, but it's us, Bobby. Has to be her. You said she's a writer. Well, there you go. Well, I'll be damned. I think I'd like to take a look for myself. What website is this? Scarypasta.com. What? Scarypasta.com. What's the name of the story? Summer in Texas. I'm writing it down. Summer in Texas. Scarypasta.com. Okay, thanks, and, hey Chris, I meant it when I said we'd love to see you. You're our family. Open invitation. Thanks, Bobby, I just might take you up on that. It's real good to talk to you again. Thanks again for your help. Anytime, kid. Take care. Bye. We'll see you, son.
Michael opened the office after a nice long break. Chris greeted him as he opened the door with,
Okay, I got it. The name she goes by now is Chloe Marks. She lives here in San Antonio, downtown of all places.
Michael looked at Chris and nodded his head.
Well, that's a start. Let's check it out. Already did the background check on her. She lives a few blocks from me on South Flores, that old building that's supposed to be really haunted, said Chris. He now showed a glimpse of that old spark, just for a second. Every building in downtown San Antonio is haunted. You ever been on one of those ghost tours? They're actually pretty fun, Michael said, remembering how much he and Carol and the kids enjoyed it when they went. Yeah, once, when Connor was 11. He liked all that stuff. Chris answered, trying his best not to go to that dark place. That was private. He did that shit alone, with a bottle and a .45. Michael stared at him, regretting his question. He broke through the awkwardness with, Yeah, well, no time like the present, right? Whose car are we taking? Chris quickly snapped out of his stupor and smirked at Michael, saying, Miss Sunshine, my friend. With that, the storm was calm for the moment, and all was well again. The snow was making a comeback all around San Antonio. The darkened downtown streets were near empty. The whole city acted like it was Armageddon outside every time there was the slightest sign of a freeze, much less snow. Miss Sunshine's roar echoed throughout every block she passed. Chris used to treat her with kindness and respect. Now he liked to take chances with her. Sometimes he actually raced some of the street punks in their Hondas and Mitsubishis. It was all for the thrill. He liked feeling something again, something other than the constant pain that resided within his soul. As they turned onto South Flores, the street was illuminated by old rustic street lamps. Down a dark alleyway, A fire glowed from an oil drum, warming a band of the city's lost children. Chris slowed the Camaro to a stop at the alleyway. The group of transients looked up and recognized Detective Priest's car. Chris was a softy at heart, especially when it came to the homeless. He and his mother were homeless for a very short time when he was 9 years old. It was only for 5 nights, but he would never forget what it felt like. He remembered his mother trying to beg for change in order to get Chris something to eat for the day. During that time, and the time afterward, they were like gypsies, moving from place to place. They had left Chris's grandparents' house in Arkansas and finally settled in the city of San Antonio. Michael motioned to the group to come to the car. The group of 4, 3 older men and maybe one around 30, walked over to Miss Sunshine with their hands in their pockets. Michael rolled down the window manually. "Evening, fellas." Chris leaned in and addressed them. "Hey, Chris, what are you doing out here on this cold-ass night, man?" asked one of the older men. "Working. Hey, have you tried the shelters around here? It's gonna be too damn cold to sleep out here." One of the other men spoke up. "Yes, sir, but they're all full up. No more room." "That's a shame," said Chris. "If you want, I can call a unit to come pick you up, let you stay in the tank for the night. Leave first thing tomorrow at 6 a.m. Just to get out of the cold, guys. It's snowing." The first older man spoke up, saying, "Nah, man, thanks. We'll be okay. We got the fire there," as he motioned to the glowing oil drum down the dark alley. Chris asked Michael, "Hey man, would you reach behind my seat? Grab that bottle back there for me?" Michael fished around for the mystery bottle behind Chris's seat, pulling out a purple suede bag with an unopened bottle of Crown Royal within. The good stuff. He presented it and looked at Chris with a questioning nod. Chris nodded back, confirming the gift to the 4 men. Michael handed it to them carefully. The youngest man accepted it with gratitude. "Thanks, guys," he said with a smile full of rotten teeth and presented the bottle to his buddies. The third older man reached out and said, "Why don't you let me hold on to that? Keep it safe." The young man complied. Michael laughed, while Chris added, "Treat her right, fellas. Stay warm." "Yeah, thanks, Chris." They waved goodbye as they made their way back to the warmth of the fire. "Take care, detectives," one of the men shouted out. Michael looked at Chris, shaking his head. Chris looked back and asked him, half expecting a smart-ass answer. "What? Got anything for me back there?" Michael playfully asked. "No, there ain't nothing back there for you. That stuff's for people like me, like those guys. You still have too much to lose."